In the floating world, every island has a name. The great ones, the ones that matter, have names carved into commemorative stone and written in the census ledgers of the High Registry. Louie's family island was called Orovale. It had 3,000 residents, 6 onsen districts, a harbor for 40 sky vessels, and a commemorative stone that listed every heir since the founding. They had crossed his name off the stone that morning. He had watched them do it. The mason apologized to him while he worked, said he was sorry. He had very kind eyes. The dawn sky stretched pale gold and rose around him, and far behind, the great well-kept island of Orovale drifted away, enormous and indifferent. A pale blue banner bearing the family crest snapped in the distance on its retreating edge. 3 wooden crates and a single trunk had tumbled through the thin cloud after being thrown from the island's lip, and Louie with them, deposited onto a sliver of raw basalt that barely deserved the word island. He stood at its northern edge, 18 years old and dark-haired, wearing a slightly too formal travel coat that someone had packed in a hurry. He was not crying. He looked at the horizon with the expression of a person who had decided very recently and without full conviction to simply continue existing. Behind him came the sound of efficient, purposeful activity. The island was raw and wind-scoured, perhaps 300 meters across, black basalt and pale scrub grass hanging in open sky, cloud trailing off its broken southern edge like smoke. And there, in the middle distance, the 3 servants had begun unpacking the crates. Bettina's voice carried without effort, brisk and warm, the tone of someone choosing optimism as a management strategy. "The second crate has the kitchen stores," she instructed. "That's the important one. Jero, please don't stack them in order of size. Stack them in order of what we'll need first. Dried fish before porcelain." Jero, the cook, 60 years old and built like a barrel, white-haired and perpetually skeptical, set down a crate with deliberate loudness. "I've been stacking crates since before your mother was born, Bettina," he said dryly. "And yet," Bettina replied, pleasant and unambiguous. Old Marco, the retired butler in his 70s with a silver mustache and the posture of a man born standing at attention, opened the trunk with practiced ceremony. He removed a folded tablecloth, shook it out in the open air, and smoothed it over a crate atop a barren rock. "Tablecloth first," he said, matter of fact, performing a small act of civilization as a philosophical statement. "Always tablecloth first." Louie turned from the edge. He looked at the tablecloth on the crate, then at his 3 servants and opened his mouth. You didn't have to come," he said gently, lost, trying very hard not to inconvenience anyone. "Any of you. I want to be clear that I didn't ask—" "Young lord," Bettina cut in, not unkindly, the way one cuts through a child's polite refusal of food they desperately need. "The tea water is heating. Would you prefer the oolong or the black?" Something behind his eyes did something complicated and private. He looked at her for a long moment. "Oolong," he said quietly, a little raw, giving in. "Please." "Oolong," she said, satisfied, already moving on. "Of course." By full morning, the light caught the scrub grass and turned it gold. Louie walked slowly along the island's perimeter, a small journal open in his hands, drawing rough shapes with charcoal, clearly untrained in surveying, but doing it anyway. Distant islands hung as dark shapes in the pale sky in every direction, and the horizon felt enormous behind him, making him look at once very small and like someone who might one day fill the space. He paused, crouched, and touched the basalt with 2 fingers. It was warm. The island was small, smaller than the stables at Orovale. The rock was volcanic, warm even up here, which meant something thermally active lay beneath the surface. The grass was salt-bleached but alive. 3 depressions in the southern face might collect rainwater. The drop on the northern edge was clean, deep enough that the lower cloud layer vanished from view. He stood and turned slowly, taking in the full circle of sky around him. It was very quiet up here. He wrote something in the journal, not survey notes, but 2 words. "My island." By midday, the camp had assembled with surprising dignity. The tablecloth-covered crate now served as a table, 4 mismatched camp stools arranged around it. A small clay brazier produced a thin thread of smoke, and Jero crouched over it with focused attention while Bettina set out 4 ceramic cups with the gravity of a state dinner. Marco stood behind Louie's stool, hands clasped behind his back. Louie sat and closed the journal carefully. Jero ladled something into a pot, and the smell arrived before the sight of it. Dashi, clean and oceanic and deeply warm. In the open, cold sky, it was almost violently comforting. "You brought dashi stock," Louie said, quiet and wondering, slightly undone by it. "I brought everything," Jero replied, mildly offended at the implication that he might not have. "I've been planning this inventory for 3 years. 3 years, Louie echoed, carefully neutral. You were 15 when I started thinking your family might do something foolish, the cook said, shrugging, staring into the pot. I am old, and I have worked for noble houses my entire life. They are always eventually foolish. Marco made a small sound. Not quite agreement. Definitely not disagreement. I served Lord Orovale Sr. for 41 years, he said with quiet dignity, looking at the horizon. He was a good man. I have served this household for 19 years. I came because I know the difference between a house worth serving and the people in it. Bettina set Louie's cup down before him and said nothing. She didn't need to. It was his cup from home, pale blue ceramic, a small chip in the handle, steam rising from it in the cold air. Louie wrapped both hands around it. I'm going to build something here, he said, very low, not quite steady. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody performed surprise. Marco adjusted his jacket. Jero tasted the broth. I have 16 weeks of stores, Bettina said, practical and warm, already calculating. After that, we'll need either a resupply contact or a productive source on the island itself. I noticed mineral deposits along the eastern face. We should investigate those first. What are we building? Jero asked, dry, not looking up. Louie looked at the open sky, then at the journal on his knee. He said the word like he was picking it up off the ground, uncertain of its weight. A city. Silence. Big one? Jero asked, a cook's question. Yes, Louie said, and there was something quietly, stubbornly alive in it. Jero nodded and stirred the pot. This appeared to conclude the matter. Far above the cloud layer, a sleek dwarven survey vessel cut through high altitude. Copper-trimmed hull, prow shaped like a stylized ram's head, the Castra clan sigil hammered in gold on the sail. On the deck, wrapped in a long charcoal coat with fur-trimmed shoulders, stood Serafina di Castra, a dwarven woman in her late 20s, compact and precise, dark-eyed, holding a brass survey instrument and studying a chart with the focused expression of someone who had never once been lost in her life. Below, through a gap in the cloud, the small island showed itself. Dark basalt, a thread of cookfire smoke rising from it. Her navigator pointed. Unregistered island, Lady Castra, he reported flatly. Thermal activity consistent with deep mineral deposit. Elevation holding stable. It's not drifting. Survey flag? Serafina did not lower the instrument. She looked at the smoke a moment, then tilted her head a single degree. Someone's already there, she observed, dry and precise. Appears so, Lady Castra, the navigator confirmed nervously. Mark it for follow-up. I want soil and stone samples, and find out who's camping on my mineral deposit. She paused, correcting herself without missing a beat. On the unregistered mineral deposit. She lowered the instrument and made a notation on the chart, and in the margin, barely visible, drew a small question mark beside the coordinates. By evening, the sky had gone deep amber and indigo, stars beginning at the zenith, distant floating islands glowing with lantern light like embers scattered across the dark. Louie sat alone at the cliff's northern edge, legs hanging over, the journal in his lap, a half-eaten bowl of soup cooling beside him. 30 meters behind him, the firelight made warm geometry against the dark, the ordinary sounds of shelter being made, Marco banking the fire, Bettina's footsteps. He opened the journal to the page with the 2 words and looked at them for a long time. The ink was still slightly unsteady, the handwriting of someone not used to claiming things. He picked up the bowl, finished it, and set it down carefully. Then, from somewhere below the island, from within the rock itself, came a deep, subsonic hum. He felt it through the stone before he heard it. His hand, resting flat on the basalt, went still. "What are you hiding down there?" he murmured, barely loud enough to be speech. The hum continued 3 more seconds, then stopped. The wind filled the silence. Louie looked up. The first full stars were out, and between 2 distant islands far to the east, something moved, too large for a bird, too fluid for a vessel, a shape that did not belong to the register of ordinary things. It turned, or seemed to, and for 1 fraction of a second the starlight hit it wrong. Then Cloud took it. He was very still, his hand flat on the warm stone. His father had said, "You are too soft to hold anything." His mother had said nothing. The mason with the kind eyes had crossed his name off the stone and said he was sorry, and Louie had thanked him. He had thanked him. From within the rock, again, barely, the hum. Louie closed the journal and stood. He did not look away from the east where the shape had been. The island hung alone in the enormous dark sky, 4 points of warm firelight at its center, the stars vast and indifferent above, and something barely still moving in the far dark.